Hi, and welcome back to AtlantaMusicCritic.com. My name is William Ford. Today we're going to be talking with two musicians from the Pittsburgh New Music Ensemble. Kevin No is the group's artistic director as well as conductor. He's going to be talking about the 2021 season of PNME, and we'll also be talking about his work with binaural sound technology and its application to live performance. Lindsay Kesselman, a soprano with PNME, will be talking about some of the works to be premiered in 2021, as well as some of the opportunities and challenges facing classical music ensembles. I think you'll find this to be an engaging and lively conversation. Remember to like, subscribe, and share. Again, this is William Ford from AtlantaMusicCritic.com. What have you been doing during the lockdown?
Well, it's a wacky world right now. I mean, my last performance was on March 6th, and our last performance, we were performing together on March 6th.
Yeah.
And that was the last, and everything's been canceled. The first thing I have scheduled is in October, and Kevin's waiting to hear what's going to happen at UMKC next year. So it's been a time of digging deep and figuring out what long-term projects we can dig into now that we have the time that we never do under normal life circumstances.
So what kind of long-term plans do you have artistically?
Well, the season, since we're not going to be live performing in July, obviously, the season for next year is a compilation of commissions we already had in the works, some of which we're supposed to do this season, some which we thought we might be doing next season. And what's actually happened is that if plans come to fruition the way I think they're going to, next year's PNME will be 100% commissions and world premieres, the entire season, every single piece.
Wow.
Pretty cool. I haven't counted the number because two of them are kind of evening length work, so that's half of it, but the others aren't. So it would be looking at, I don't know, 10 or 11 world premieres in a single season, which is pretty great,
Absolutely. So these may be pieces that you've played before, but it's the first time all of them?
Every single piece.
Brand new.
Wow.
Yeah. So there are a few things in the works. I'll just tell you. One of them is there's a piece by Evan Chambers called Old Burying Ground. And that's the piece that Lindsay and I were doing together when she mentioned that was the last time that we performed. And Lindsay lost her mind and asked me to sing with her other professional group. So, but the piece calls for folk singer. So I was able to pull that off and not sound too terribly shitty. So that's good. But we decided we really loved the piece. So we commissioned Evan to rework it and imagine that and do it for a whole new PNME orchestration. And we're going to do a film in the cemetery that inspired the piece, and we're going to put together a whole thing in a PNME way that is really not the way the piece was originally intended. It was actually a full orchestra piece, and then her professional group Haven commissioned a reduced one for only like 3 or 4 people, and then we've recommissioned another one for the full PNME team. So that's one of the things that's happening.
And it's such a great concept. The composer just loves walking around in cemeteries and being inspired by people's stories. And so all of the texts come from tombstone epitaphs from a specific cemetery, actually 2 specific cemeteries in New England. And they take place, these are people who lived around 1830, 1850. And so each movement tells the story of another one of these people kind of from this town. And the thing that makes the text so beautiful is that in these congregations, the the preacher actually wrote the tombstone epitaphs in a very poetic, beautiful, sensitive way for the people in his congregation. And so a lot of them have more to do with messages for the people who are still living than just focusing on the details of the person who died. So they're really poetic and not just sort of the logistical nuts and bolts of born on this day, dead on this day.
Right.
So it's just, you learn a lot about life through sort of pursuing the stories of these people's deaths. And that's why we like the piece so much. It just sort of screamed out for a PNME project.
Are you both going to be singing?
Yeah, and then the other members of the ensemble will be used, in different combinations and in different ways throughout. And there may also be a spoken character who sort of plays the role of the preacher. So we're really excited about that, though.
And to do that in that way would be a very different thing than the way the piece has been done before, which has just always been a concert performance of chamber music. This would be something very different. So that's one of them. So another big project is a piece that Lindsay and I are co-writing with composer Stephen Bryant. This one is inspired by Renee Magritte, a Belgian surrealist, right? And this is a brand new binaural commission. Lindsay and I are sort of working on the theatrical components, writing the script. If there's sung parts, we're writing the lyrics for that. We're sort of doing the book. And then Stephen is writing all of the music. And it's a pretty cool project. We decided we would I think we're going to take probably 9 images when it's all over. And each one of them has a sort of unique challenge that's built into the fabric of the way Magritte paints and thinks. He very often presents some seemingly normal scenario and then changes one variable within it such that the whole thing makes no sense anymore. One example is this image that he called Not to Be Reproduced, where a guy is looking at his image in the mirror, but what he sees in the mirror instead of his face is the back of his head, which I mean, when you look at it at first, you're like, oh, guy looking in the mirror. Wait, what the fuck? So the binaural imaging and using the headphones in the way that we do allows us to do things that you just couldn't do in a normal situation. So we're hoping to find the kind of musical equivalent of each one of these things, a way to use the technology musically to represent the dichotomy of those two things, one seemingly normal and one completely out of character. Another example is a painting, I think it's called Empire of Light, where the street scene is clearly nighttime. There's a night light on and it's dark on the porches of the street, except that it's broad daylight outside. The sky is as though the sun is out. And you look at the two and you're like, which is it? Is it day or night? Somehow these two are married together in a way that you just never see, And I think there are ways that binaural can help us sort of paint that portrait. So each one of these movements is going to be very different. There might be one that is like a straight up sung aria. There are a couple of instrumental things that are rocking, just kind of hardcore instrumental pieces. There's a movement that I think is going to be just a straight up theatrical argument, almost like a Who's on First routine between Abbott and Costello. That's just a spoken thing. There's going to be one that's a tango and probably choreographed. So there's just a lot of diversity within it, and hopefully these images will carry us through the evening in a really unique way. So that's another one of the both of those are evening length works.
Now you've had the experience with the binaural presentations. What have you learned from that, and how will that inform what you're doing in this piece about Magritte?
That's a great question. Do you want to start, or you want me to start?
Sure, I'll start. It's such an enormous world of options to dive into. So we still feel like we're at the beginning. And our first evening length production with binaural sound was Grey Cat and the Flounder, which was retrofitted for that technology. It wasn't composed with that in mind. And so we're so excited about this Bryant project because it's the first time that we're commissioning a new theatrical work in which the composer has that in mind from the very, very beginning, and we can really make that an essential element. But I think, what we're really learning is, despite the fact that when you tell people they're coming to the theater and they're going to put on headphones, there's some resistance to that. but what we've really discovered is that if we're doing our jobs to really mine the creative potential out of the binaural sound world, people forget almost instantly that they're even wearing headphones. And instead of creating a technological barrier between us on the stage and what we're doing in the audience, it brings them so much closer. We feel like it brings them right onto the stage with us, and they even start to feel like the sound is coming from them. So it just creates, people have used words like, you know, I just can't believe the intimacy of this experience. I can't believe how much this illuminates the humanity of the performing arts, which is just contrary to what you might think if you just heard that you were going to this production that required a lot of tech to make it happen, you know.
Would you ever consider, rather than just the binaural experience of listening to people on the stage, having one channel, for example, be that, and the other channel having content that's unrelated to what's going on stage? In other words, for example, in the instance of the Magritte painting, that would capture two sides.
You're talking about you could flip over to sort of an information on the piece kind of?
No, you could actually have the live performance saying one thing and the other earpiece saying something different, maybe really too much for people to, but that's what his painting's saying. They're saying
Right,
two different things at once. And
right.
that occurs to me when you're dealing with two channels of information like that,
Right.
you could provide two different sets of
Yeah.
information.
That's a really good point. And we've thought a lot about the differing ways that your perception of what's happening can be amplified or changed or snookered, if you will, by using the headphones. One of the chief ways is that if we go into City Theater and we pre-record something with the group configured in a certain exact way, and then when you come in and we're playing live that same thing, we recorded it right there in the same spot, you can't tell the difference between us having pre-recorded it there and us playing it live. Like, the imaging will be exactly the same. And this allows us to have a group playing something and then stop playing all of a sudden, and the music is continuing. And you can't figure out how the hell that could have happened. I mean, you really thought it was live the whole time. And then so the question becomes, wait a minute, was I ever hearing it live, or was that always pre-recorded? That's something that I learned in part from the encounter, watching how they use the tech for that piece. So that's one way that we might explore this. But I think your thing is also true. I think that this affords irony in a way that is often not doable. Here's one example. We had talked about the possibility for this empire of light of the night and the day together. We had talked about including pre-recorded binaural sounds that we had done, and we would have, perhaps in one ear you'd have the birds of the day, and in the other ear you'd have crickets for the night. You never hear birds and crickets together, but that sort of imagery of the two things, I think that's exactly what you're referring to. That type of thing can be done. So yeah, we're definitely thinking about things like that and how we do it.
It's also true that because you are placing specific sound sources in specific locations, we're finding that the brain is capable of processing way more levels of musical engagement at one time.
Yeah.
So when things normally on a stereo mix would just start to sound too busy and you just couldn't distinguish anything that you were hearing, with binaural sound you can layer 4 and 5 whole different instruments or spoken text with sung text, or all kinds of different things, or soundscape like birds and cricket sounds with music, and you can perceive and process all of it in a much more clear way.
Can I share with you guys, I didn't even tell you this, but I figured this out the other day. I had the perfect way to explain this. It's not a metaphor, but to explain how this works in this example is this. When you think about when you watch a news program and there's, say, 4 panelists and they get into an argument, and even 3 of them are talking at the same time, when we're watching on television, we can't understand a fucking thing they're saying. And then the host usually says, oh, we can't talk over each other, nobody can understand. It's fair. We hear this happen all the time. 3 people, too much. Maybe 2 people talking at the same time, you can kind of hang. but 3 impossible. Now, put yourself in a busy restaurant. There's 300 people all over the place. There's all kinds of conversations. But you can sit there in your chair and you can choose orally which conversation you're going to eavesdrop on. You can just think to yourself, I want to hear that. And you just kind of like force your attention over there. And you can still parse that shit out. But you can't do it on a news program with high-end microphones. Why is that? Because it's not binaural, because there's no location for the sound. There's only left and right. But we don't live that way. We live in a sphere where we hear all around us. So if all of those locations are available, that's what Lindsay's talking about. You can actually parse out all the different information by simply sort of directing your attention in that way. Does this make sense?
Yes,
this
it
is actually
does.
the easiest way of explaining it. I just never thought about why. I just thought about this the other day. I just forgot to tell you. Why is it that I can hear 300 people talking and I can eavesdrop, but if it's 3 on the television, I can't understand it.
Yeah.
And that's because it's been condensed into essentially mono or stereo channels, and that's not enough space. Yeah. You just can't hear it. So
I just wanted to jump back and just a little anecdote. When I worked for state government, there was always the joke that they were kind of indirect when they were going to get rid of you. So kind of like a Magritte painting, you'd go into the restroom, and if you didn't see your own reflection when you looked in the mirror, that was the first sign they were going to get rid of you. Same idea.
Yeah. I got you. I wanted to tell you 1 or 2 more specifics since you asked about what we're going to do that we learned from Grey Cap.
Sure.
A couple of things. One of them is that Michel, that's the name for our microphone. Michel is much better at doing what he does and really kind of defining the image the closer we are to him. The specificity of what you hear is far more amplified when you get closer to him than when you're further away. So that's one thing about setup, about how we work with him. Another one is that soft works better. There's a certain point at which it doesn't matter how we set up the stage and what we're doing. There's a certain point of fullness where all the images collide with each other. And it happens somewhere around mezzo forte, a little more than that. At pianissimo or 3Ps, it's astonishing how great it is, the level of intimacy and specificity of the sound. Those are incredible. We lose spaciousness, and in a certain sense, we kind of lose intensity the louder we get. And that's been another thing that I've definitely discovered working with it in terms of really specific things about how we're going to do it different.
Is that a function of the microphones, do you think, overloading?
I think it's the human ear. I mean, I can't even tell you, just hundreds of hours, listening. And when you listen to great stereo recordings, from really high-end producers in let's say the 60s until now, great, just Bohemian Rhapsody and stuff like this, you can still resolve everything, even when it gets really jamming loud. And you can still resolve everything binaural. I can hear all the parts. What I lose is the location of all the parts. I can't separate where they are in the image field. I can sort of do left and right, but I'm not getting anything about front and back or behind or around or up and down. That's gone at a certain point. And so anytime we want to really get high def resolve about the location of sounds, or when that is part of the expression of the music, we've got to keep it softer. And the last thing is, it has a dramatic effect on the way we play. If you really want to take advantage of what Michel does, you have to take what I think are the great practices of score study and interpretation anyway, and you have to put them in hyperdrive. If you really exaggerate the things that we know that we're supposed to exaggerate, in my opinion, but we usually do it at like level 2. And if you do it at level 175, all of a sudden, Michel just comes alive and you can't believe it. We practiced this many times this last summer, and I would have different team members come out and listen. And I kept saying, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. And they would do it, and I would say, more, more, more. And then somebody would come out and listen. And I would say more, and all at once, it would just like break through the clouds and all the imaging would become so clear and you would feel surrounded by music. And then as soon as people said it, they were all like, oh God, we got to do way more of that, way more of that, you know? So there's a kind of dramatic way of playing that we haven't yet mastered. And part of that is because the technical problem we're having is that we're not yet at a place where we can give the players in their ears a representative sample of what they're hearing in the audience.
Right.
If we were doing that, they would be able to do this more easily. But right now, we're not able to do it. And I'm still trying to figure out how we're going to get closer to that. Some of that problem is technical. Some of that is gear. Some of it. Some of it is attitude. Some of it is like a couple of people just like aren't down and just don't want to think about it and prefer to play without headphones. And so they're never going to get to a place that they can channel this thing I'm talking about. But, you know, like any time you're kind of revolutionizing anything, it's never a straight line. So, you know, got to mobilize the attitudes and the team at the same time as the tech, you know, so.
It's interesting that you mentioned recordings from the 60s and 70s. I was a big audiophile back in those days. And of course, today people don't care so much about the quality of sound. There's still a few audiophiles, but they really care about portability and selection.
Right.
So we're willing to settle for MP3s as opposed to
right, the real thing.
Right. But there were actually some binaural recordings that were made back in the 60s and 70s.
Dark Side of the Moon, for example. Yeah.
Yes. And even orchestral ones.
Yeah.
And even I remember that we had 4-channel sound, which we still have, but not like we did that then. And right in the Rite of Spring with the microphones right in the middle of the orchestra, which was, of course, a very different experience. A lot of people didn't like it. I thought it was kind of cool, but sometimes it's like when symphony orchestras today have people sitting behind them, or they invite them on stage to listen. It is a very different experience. It takes some getting used to, but nothing wrong with a new experience and getting used to the new experience.
Well, the good news is with a new music ensemble, people should be expecting that we're going to be, you know, breaking the so-called rules and trying new things. And so that's kind of built into that. Much harder to try this shit with a whole orchestra on a Brahms symphony. That's for sure. You know? Right.
Well, and nobody seems, well, just the resources simply aren't there. How can you tie up 100 musicians just to kind of mess around and see what happens? The advantage you have is a smaller ensemble.
Yes, but also outrigging a 2,400 seat huge concert hall with 2,400 sets of headphones. Not necessarily practical, but the good news is I don't have to give a shit because I'm not trying to do that in orchestra. I'm trying to do it with us, you know. And we have 200 sets and it's working and we know how to do it. You know, we've taken that first really, really hard step and we've shown. I mean, I think Great Cat and the Flounder was a kind of proof of concept, you know, in terms of how the thing worked. And it does, and we can set it up, and the audience does love it. And so many people were, viscerally impacted by the quality of the music on a level that they couldn't possibly have been another way. So we know it works. The question is just what is the next step? And for us, I think the next step is commissions that were designed from the beginning to take advantage of this rather than retrofitting. And then we're going to learn a whole new mess of things along the way. I know that Stephen, one of the reasons we chose him is because he's done a lot of electronic media and stuff with his pieces for a long time anyway. And I think that's one of the coolest parts is the incorporation of pre-recorded material to mix with the live material. That's something you just can't do effectively with speakers, not like this, you know.
Because it comes very obvious then.
Yeah.
Right.
As opposed to having it right up on your ear. That, of course, is one of the things that I enjoyed most about the performance in Edinburgh was the intimacy of it. Lindsay, you've already mentioned that, but it is an incredibly intimate experience.
The thing is, we just have to keep staying focused on it being about expression. That's the point. The point is not the tech. The point is expression. You know, so as long as we're using it as an expressive tool and then setting up marketing around it, I'm down. But what I'm not interested in is the marketing of the binaural. I think that's a cool part, but that's not the point. The point is to make music in a way that we couldn't make any other way, and we're just at the beginning of that. I will say this. We had, there's a recording engineer that lives in Lansing, and when Lindsay was in town with me, we were performing these John Mackey songs at Michigan State in November. She's pretty good friends with this guy, and he's sort of the go-to recording engineer in Michigan for classical projects. He's done lots and lots of them. He's got incredible ears, and everybody wants to work with him. So we told him what we were up to. So he came over to the house, and we played him various recordings. We played him some Great Cat and the Flounder film, and we also played him this Corleano, Mr. Tambourine Man mix that I'm working on that we recorded in binaural. And we put it on, we was playing the whole deal for him, and he's just sat there and he listened and listened and listened, and then he looked at me and he goes, oh shit, I'm rethinking my whole life. Like, that was the first thing he said. I'm rethinking my whole life. I mean, that's a pretty big endorsement, you know, of the idea. We're not doing it perfectly yet. And there are moments that are just astonishing in this mix. And then there are other moments where I say, that didn't work the way I thought it. As anything when you're first trying it. But the fact that some people like that are just completely mowed over and just think, oh shit, I'm never going back, you know, that is a ringing endorsement, you know. So
Can you tell what it is that causes some pieces to fall flat?
Well, right now, the biggest problem that I'm having with the Corleano, I mean, I think Great Cat never has, well, eventually it never had any moments that fell flat in terms of the film. Did you see the film also or not? I can't remember.
No.
Okay. Well, I could send you the link, and as long as you have good headphones for that, I don't think there's any moments in that mix that I'm not happy about. It took a lot of work because we made a couple mistakes when we recorded it that I had to figure out creative ways to fix in the mix later. But I think that worked. But the Corleano has the problem of just getting too busy and too loud in places. And trying to not have it just become like this is continually tricky. And I made one fundamental error when we recorded it. Lindsay had to be, it's a song cycle feature for her, and she had to be mic'd on 2 mics. She had to have a special up close, which is the primary vocal mic, and then she had to be close enough to Michelle that about 60% of her sound was on him. Fine, we got that right. But the problem was we needed to also isolate her microphone, this microphone, from the rest of the ensemble, because there's way too much of the ensemble in her primary vocal mic, because we didn't record this in isolation booths. And I wish if I could do one thing differently, I would go back and do that. But that also means we have to figure out how to do that live. We have to somehow isolate microphones from each other, at the very least a vocal mic from Michelle. We have to somehow isolate that even in a live context. And that's something we've never tried to do before. So that's one of the things that's on my mind.
What about some of that shielding that orchestras use to keep the trombones from blasting the cellos?
Maybe.
You often see when there's a rock group playing with a symphony, they're usually surrounded in the plastic so that the symphony musicians can continue to hear each other.
Right. You can almost not even see the drummer. They're just encased in a cube of glass, you know?
Carbamide. Yeah. Interesting. A lot of things to consider. Do you lay it out to help guide you when you're doing a recording like that, or are you winging it? Really?
Is it possible to have both? Is it possible to say both? I mean, here's the thing. The Corleano, this is the part that even most of the team doesn't really understand. I think Lindsay does, but I'm not sure that most of the rest of the team does. The choices about where people are sitting and whether or not they are moving when they're playing, and whether all these kinds of things that I'm doing in the mix after the fact that are just totally crazy. I mean, nobody does this kind of stuff. Those are an extension of my belief about what's inherent in the music to begin with. It is not me coming to it and going, okay, there's the music. Now let's fiddle with dials until we really like it. Like that is not what's happening. I hear it that way to begin with. So when we're sitting there, I'm already, from an interpretation standpoint, I already kind of know how I want those sounds to go. And then the question is, how do you capture those in a recording? But because, as far as I know, I'm the only person that really talks like that or thinks about it, it's impossible to do it according to any pre-prescribed idea or to get it right the first time. So it's really both. I do know what we're trying to get, so that part's not guesswork. How you get it on the recording is guesswork and experimentation. Does that make sense?
Sure it does.
I mean,
Sure.
I think about it like bringing out and making manifest the theatricality inherent within the piece of music. So,
right, that's right.
Like the first real prelude movement of the Corleone is about this sort of magical Mr. Tambourine Man sneaking up and then leading the main character into her story. And so we were trying to figure out spatially how to make that happen. And eventually not only did it change the way we did the setup on the stage while we were recording, but then in the mix later, Kevin can have the tambourine come up behind me, approaching, getting closer and closer and closer. And then by the end of the movement, switch to being in front of me and draw me out this way into the next movement. And and another example in that piece is the movement Blowin' in the Wind. The bass drum is supposed to sort of represent these far off gunfire and bomb blasts. You're supposed to feel like you're in the middle of a war zone. And there's this kind of monotonous drone bass drum thing that happens, but we were able to move it around in the mix so that one time it's coming from over here, one time it's coming from way over there. And so the result is that even if the audience wouldn't be able to say specifically what's going on, they feel surrounded. They feel like there are actual things happening around them. And that's what we're trying to do. And, the problem of the busyness and things getting too loud and crowded, that's true live also. I mean, some of this is our orchestrational problems that we actually have a better chance of solving using these tools than you could ever get in a live performance. And our goal is to make these recordings to enhance to the greatest degree of detail we can those theatrical elements, and then but as a means to promote the idea of performing live and accomplishing as much of that as we can, and so it's not just dependent on the recordings. It's like giving them the taste through the recordings so that they want to come and sit with other people in a live theater experience and experience a lot of it.
I would refer you to YouTube, and there's a series of videos that they call 8D music, and you're supposed to listen to it with headsets, and it's the worst. It's somebody manipulating volume in each channel, and the music for about 3 seconds you think, oh, that's intriguing, and after that you think, oh my goodness, this is not how this music was intended to be heard. It's where the technology totally gets separated and dominates the artistic merit of the music.
Sure, it becomes the end and not the means.
Exactly, and it's pretty dreadful. And I remember this back again from the 70s, is that one of the complaints they had back then is when people used headphones, that the sound seemed to be coming from the back of the head. And that was always disconcerting for people. But one of the advantages of binaural sound was it puts the sound stage more definitely in front of you if you want it to be in front of you.
Yeah, no, we have found that too. The idea of using that sound kind of creeping up behind you, the back of your neck and making your hair stand on end is an effect that is really, really effective in certain moments. But in general, the core of it, you want it to be right here. You want it to be like they're sending it to you individually.
Good point. Yes. And again, then the technology is subservient to the actual performance in the intent of the music. Yeah, that's great.
goes back to interpretation. It goes back to your ideas that you're trying to communicate through the music, and then through using the technology to help you do that. But you can't make heads or tails of any of these variables if you don't have really clear vision about what that is that you're trying to express. So it almost demands more specificity of intention from the musicians than we have experienced before. And we like that part of it a lot, and it becomes very clear in a live performance binaurally which phrases we've really given our full attention and intention to, and which ones we're allowing to be generic. And the goal, of course, is to make it 100% specific and not generic at all.
One of the things that I noticed about the City Theatre as well as the Assembly Hall in Edinburgh is they're very dry spaces.
Yeah.
If you get too reverberant, things are just going to get muddied, even when you're closely miking as you're doing. So that can also kind of create a sonic smear for what you're trying to create. So those were really good environments to do what you were doing, it seems to me.
For us, the drier the better. If we're going to go that way, I would much rather us control the reverb and not conflict with the existing space.
Right.
There's a limit to that. I mean, if you have a really dry room, no problem. But if you had a really small room, then you just don't have enough space for the directionality of the different voices to ever hit the mic from a different location. They're too crowded around a small room, and the early reflections of all the places wind up disguising everything. So we need a reasonably sized place, like medium size, like Assembly was fine, City Theater is fine. It's not big, that's fine, but it doesn't have to be live. The drier the better for this, in a certain sense. Well,
and in some ways that's always been true for PNME in general, is that we love the fact that each show can have such a different and distinct personality. And when we start with a clean slate of a very dry environment, we have to create our full world every time. And we have to make all of the decisions instead of relying on our space to do the basic sound design for us.
One of the coolest things about the City Theater is the niche that is on the right-hand side of the stage above, where somebody can be up there, and
yes,
that works so well.
Often.
Yes, that works so well. Yes, and I think when I first heard PNME, that was one of the things that impressed me most, was the ability to bring the theater of the music together, which now is kind of a tagline for you, which I think is appropriate. But that was really impressive, because too often you hear new music ensembles that just simply are new music ensembles without adding to it in any way. It's great for music, but it's not necessarily a great experience.
Right.
I was just going to say, with the Magritte and somehow being able to integrate some of his work would be really good if you can do it in some way that's alive, not just a slide on the wall of his work.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I don't know how to solve that problem, but I feel what you're saying.
Yeah.
We're thinking about it too. It may, right now, and unless we can figure out how to unlock what you're saying, it will be a slide on the wall. But right. I agree with you. It's a shortcoming. And what I would like to do is somehow be wrapped in the visual in the same way that we're going to be wrapped in the sound.
Right.
I don't yet know how to do that, or whether or not, even if I did, we would have the finance necessary to pull off something like that. I just don't know.
That is one of our biggest sort of philosophical quandaries, though. We keep coming up against thinking about all kinds of different binaural projects, is what is the appropriate visual, or what are the various categories of appropriate visuals on the stage to go with this magnificent three-dimensional specific sound. In some cases, it would be possible for the visual to be too much and be distracting from that. So we need just the right level of something that enhances, supports that, and connects with it and interacts with it while not taking over. And that's really hard to figure out.
Yeah. One of the things that I've always been bothered by is symphonies are kind of death on people using their phones, and I get that because it can be extraordinarily distracting for patrons. Yet there could be a section of the audience where people who want to use phones to get information about the performance, for example, could sit and not bother anybody except each other.
Yeah.
And to some degree, it would seem that using a phone in some way to capture the paintings would be kind of interesting. Not just a picture of it, but panning and close-ups and all that kind of. Anyway.
There's only one time so far I've heard phones used in a performance in a really cool way that actually made the piece better. The rest of the time, so far, it's all been gimmicks and stuff. And like a lot of people say, we need to figure out a way to incorporate them. And I'm sure there's the cell phone concerto now and all this shit, but none of it's ever done anything. But there was one piece I heard in Kansas City where, I can't remember who the composer was, but he had it was like some kind of streaming service. I can't remember how this worked exactly, where before the piece even started, he encouraged everyone to get out their phone and click this link. So everybody tapped into this streaming service. And whenever you tapped in, that's when your music began playing through your cell phone. And it was all this background music. So everybody had a slightly different starting point to the background music. And then that laid this overall pad of like 300 or 400 people in the hall, all of which had their cell phones, and all were just softly playing this ambient music. And then the live performance began over the top of that. So you had 400 or 500 speakers in the room where all these different places and stuff was happening, plus the live thing. That was a cool sound. I was in the audience and I thought that works. That was cool. But the rest of it, so far, I haven't seen anybody unlock in a way that really was meaningful.
Right.
I participated in a premiere of an Ian Dickey piece a couple years ago in an art museum, and this was a massive project and collaboration between the composer and a whole university department that basically developed an app to go along with a piece that he wrote. And so the idea was everybody walking into the museum for this performance would download the app, and then they would be receiving a full sort of electronic soundscape portion of the piece and feed that was unique to them based on where they were in the space.
Yeah, that's cool.
So that was really cool. And that also was true in Chris Sarone's opera with the industry out in the LA train station. They did something similar. And from what I heard, I mean, I only had my experience as a performer in the Dickey piece, but the audience thought it was very cool. And the fact that each person had their own individualized experience based on their position in space made them feel like they were participating. And that was really cool. But it was, it was multiple tens of thousands of dollars to go into developing that app and making it compatible. And so I think these things will get more seamless over time as people have more experience with them. But
as we've said, though, the key thing is to be sure that it has integrity.
That's
and
right.
Again, is just not the gimmick as Kevin was talking about, because it certainly can become that.
Yeah.
It's so funny that people are starting to think of me as like a techie type person. And I'm like, this is hilarious. I'm not techie at all. I just want the impact to be deeper. And so the tech is just a way of doing it. But on its own, the tech is not interesting to me. And I don't particularly enjoy learning all this shit about the cabling. And I don't care about any of this stuff. What I do care about is people coming up to me in tears after a performance. That's all I'm trying to get at. I want people to be moved, and I think we can find better ways.
Yes, right. I agree with that. And when you get that $1 million grant to enable you to spend some time, you'll probably become very interested in it. But it is something that you're always having to do kind of on the fly now, it would seem.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Are there any other pieces that you're going to be premiering you want to talk about?
We just got a NEA grant to commission the composer Doug Cuomo. He's going to write a piece. We just found out that we got this a couple of days ago. So we don't know what the nature of that piece is going to be yet, but it will be some kind of theatrical work, probably 20 to 30 minutes, I'm guessing. We have our singer Timothy Jones. You remember Timothy, right?
I think so.
Handsome black guy,
Yeah.
big voice. He's
Yeah.
like a real singer, unlike me. He's like a real. Anyway, so he's going to have week 2, and the plan right now is for that to all be brand new commissions that were all written for him. So that would be you've seen these shows that we've done, I think, that are sort of a focus on one team member. I think maybe you've seen a couple of those. And this is going to be his chance. And so he's got many composers lined up. And he says Bill Bolcom, for example, wants to write a piece for him. So that would be kind of a big deal, you know. So I don't know how many pieces that we'll have, but probably I'm going to guess 6 or 7 different works on that program, all of which would be commissions for him. And we're also going to do David Biedenbender's Shell and Wing. Oh, that isn't the world premiere. That's right. We did commission it, but we did already premiere
That's true.
I forgot about that. That's the one piece that we've played once.
Which one is that?
It's by David Biedenbender, and it's called Shell and Wing. And that turned out to be absolutely incredible piece. This was part of the American Composers Forum thing that we did, where we had this whole competition and chose 3 winners and put these pieces on together.
It's their Connect program.
Yeah, and that thing is fantastic music, just spectacular. And we're going to record it next summer, so we're going to play it as a part of it. Because with PNME's schedule, if we're going to record something, we have to also be playing it like that. We don't have time to do only one, you know.
Right.
We can't. So.
How early do the musicians have to come in, or will they have to come in for rehearsing this for next year?
Right now, the plan is the same. Believe it or not, our shows, we start on Monday and go up on Friday every week. There have been 1 or 2 exceptions to this. The first time we did Drunken Moon, we did 2 weeks to stage that. The same for Just Out of Reach. These are these big evening long theater pieces. And the first time we did Grey Cat, we got 2 weeks on it. The second time, which was this season, we only got 1 week on it. Yeah, but most of the time, it's first rehearsal is Monday morning and the show's on Friday.
Do you have everybody lined up for this?
In team members?
Yeah, all the musicians.
Well, yes and no. So our flutist Lindsay Goodman retired. So we're in the process of auditioning for the flute spot. This summer, we had 2 people lined up. Erica Boysen, who teaches at UNC Greensboro. Mm-hmm. And she's part of something they call her the moving flutist, isn't that right?
Yeah.
So she does a lot of choreography with her work. And the other one is a guy named Tim Monroe, who's the longtime flutist of 8th Blackbird that retired a few years ago. He's also interested in the job. And so our hope right now is that both of them will be re-auditioning next summer, and each would have 2 weeks. Other than that, everybody else is the same. We have a new lighting designer, but everybody else is the same.
I assume this is tough on the bottom line, the not having a season this year.
You know, so far, it has not been. So far, we got lucky. This is one of the unique benefits of the way our season works, because we're only in July. So, you know, so far, the way everything has gone down, there have been a couple things that have been reductions in finance and stuff that we were going to get. And we definitely won't get the same in-person amount of, you know, individual giving. We won't get that. And we obviously won't get ticket sales. We won't get any of that. But the way all the grant structures worked out and everything else, right now we stand to actually temporarily benefit. We're going to add a little to our nest egg that will help us for the long term. So right now it's looking like financially it's actually going to be okay. That all depends on how things actually shake out starting next year. I would not be at all surprised to see government funding, for example, for PNME. We get about $8,000 every year from something called the Regional Allegheny District.
Yeah, right. The asset district. Yeah.
Yeah, I would not be surprised to see that go away forever for all of us. I would not be surprised if it just doesn't get wiped out. I would not be surprised to see everybody's grants get cut by 50% next year. You know, so we're okay for the short term. For the next year or 2, we're in good shape. I just hope that post all of this, things actually get back to where they were, and I'm not at all sure that they will. used as an excuse for just lowering everybody and then staying there.
Right.
I wouldn't be
We
surprised.
feel like the real impact of this will come later. And so we're trying to use the time now, not having a season and not getting ready to go into our sort of normal frenzied time, to really look at big picture infrastructural issues for PNME and shore up some big things that we just often don't have time to deal with. And we're hoping to position ourselves for a position of strength for next season and come back with a bang, because we've got all these great plans and the funding for those projects has come through for the most part, and so we can move ahead. But we are worried about the future beyond next summer, as all arts organizations are, and we're trying to just be smart about it and anticipate those problems.
Were you able to take advantage of like the PPP, the payroll protection, pandemic pay, or whatever? No.
No, but that's in part because our team isn't getting paid. I mean, they weren't getting paid before, and now that we're not going to play the season, they're still not going to get paid. So it wasn't like we're in the middle of getting paid and then got cut off. We never got to the place where they were going to get paid. And since everybody is independent contractors, we can't call them employees to begin with. So
the worst of all possible worlds, I guess.
Yeah.
Under this circumstance.
Definitely the team is just not getting paid this year, and that sucks for everybody. But we're only one of, a million of these. Lindsay lost probably 12 gigs right in a row or something. She lost 30 or 40 grand worth of income like that. And Ian lost that. Everybody did. Everybody lost all their gigs, just gone, So.
Right. And there are members of the team who have, symphony orchestra positions and those kinds of things that have taken reductions, but not complete cuts.
Well, that won't last forever.
No, it won't. It won't. And it has long range impacts. As everybody's talking about, it's not only the gigs that were canceled this spring, it's about the insecurity of organizations being able to plan for next year too, with any degree of reliability. So, I've lost some gigs for next spring because those organizations have been financially hit so much. Those projects have just been called off indefinitely. And we just have to see, we have to pivot as a whole culture and see what is possible still and how we survive this, because it's long enough of a time that we can't just sort of hunker down and wait for it to just restart and go back to normal. That normal is gone, so we have to just figure out what new normal. Everybody's talking about the same things, but we're trying to be hopeful about it. We do feel fortunate in terms of PNME that we can announce very soon the dates for next year, and we will know exactly what the programs will be, and that will set us apart from other organizations that have more typical season structures during regular months. And so we're hoping that will work in our favor, that we can say, okay, you're going to really need a trip next summer, so plan around this weekend when we're doing this thing and come to Pittsburgh and check it out. But so we feel good about that, but again, that's just for next year, and we'll see.
I have kept you for an hour. That is enough.
We're so happy to see you, though. Kevin's big. He keeps disappearing to go fold his bread.
I'm sorry, I am here. I just have to keep tending the bread.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. We look forward to seeing you at least next summer.
Yeah, absolutely.
All
right, guys. Take care.